Well, thank you for inviting me. I'd like to give a little background because we've been through this missile defense exercise before. My experience is mostly with the Soviet Union and Russia, and so I think there's a direct analogy there. The big event giving stability to our world in the strategic sense was in 1972 in Moscow when the anti-ballistic missile treaty was signed. I had the privilege of being there. It was a major event, and it made sure that each side realized that they could not make a missile attack on the other without suffering a crippling blow in retaliation. So the ABM missile systems were limited initially to 2 sites in each country, hardly enough to give nationwide protection, and then reduced to 1 site. That was all made possible because it was President Nixon who asked us, the CIA, if I trust, can you verify? And we told him, how soon do we need to verify? And he said, probably 2 weeks or so. I said, yeah, we can do that. And we did. 1983. So 11 years later, we discovered a giant Soviet radar station in Krasnoyarsk in Siberia. It was a giant ABM system. Ronald Reagan, our president at the time, called them on it. They protested. They said, no, it's not that. But after 6 years of negotiation, this is the way we used to do things. We used to talk. We used to negotiate. We used to get around the table. And long story short, they tore it down, okay? They tore it down. So being able to trust, but then being able to verify is key to all this. Fast forward to 2001, when President Bush comes into office and he says, I'm getting out of the ABM treaty. That was a key moment in the strategic equation because the ABM treaty was the main source for strategic stability. The US started building missile defense systems and they surrounded Russia with these missile defense systems. And the Russians were understandably very concerned about how this would change the equation. Now, it's important to say that engineers and scientists tell me, and these are good ones, that, a ballistic missile defense system can always be defeated by decoys and by other means. But, President Putin doesn't have the option of saying to his generals, oh, don't worry about it. They'll never work. They'll never work. We can always defeat it. The US is building these systems. The Russians are very concerned. And what I have here is a couple of slides that show why the US is building these and why the Russians are so concerned. Now, the first thing I would say is that money is involved. The anti-ballistic missile system, which most people say will not work, is an incredibly, what should we say, a corporate welfare system. Billions and billions and billions of dollars are sunk into this for what? Well, to keep the corporations happy, to do what Eisenhower warned against, the military-industrial complex business. Now, this is very serious, but it doesn't seem to bother the military-industrial complex. It does bother the Russians. May I have the first slide, please? This shows a conversation. It was overheard on an ABC microphone. President Obama and Russian President Medvedev at the time were at a summit in Seoul, South Korea. And Obama was answering Medvedev, who was saying, look, we have to get together and talk about this national missile defense that is worrying us very greatly. You said it was against Iran. We don't believe that. You said it was against North Korea. We looked at the globe, and that doesn't calculate either. We need to talk about this. And what does Obama say? He says, well, look, just wait until I get reelected, then we can deal. Then I will have more flexibility. And Medvedev, who is doing all this in behalf of the oncoming President Putin, they sort of rotated. He said, okay, I'll tell Vladimir this, okay? Now, that was the way they left it back in 2012. That was what, 4 or 5 years ago now. Did the U.S. respond with dealing once Obama was reelected? I don't see any evidence of that. May I have the next slide, please? That was 2012. Now we go ahead to 2014. We know what happened in Kiev. You don't see it much in the U.S. newspapers, but there was a coup mounted by the Western intelligence services. It was the most blatant coup in history since it was advertised beforehand on YouTube. That's another story. In any case, the Russians were very, very upset at this because Kiev, of course, is right on Moscow's doorstep. So what did they do? Well, they figured that they had to do something about Crimea. And when Crimea was folded back into the Soviet Union, Putin said at a Q&A on Russian TV, look, NATO was very important. The encroachment by NATO eastward, despite their promise not to do that when the Berlin Wall fell, that was very important. But even more important, okay, of at least equal importance was the prospect that missile defense systems will be put in the Ukraine, in the Black Sea, and around the periphery of Russia. This we could not tolerate, and this was as big a reason as any that the annexation of Crimea took place. That's really big. I have a conversation that I'd like you to listen to now in just about 5 seconds. It has to do with, you'll see what it has to do with. It's very brief. If you fall asleep, you'll miss the whole thing. May we have that little clip, please?
Я был лично против этого выхода. Я понимаю, о чем вы говорите. Я бы сказал, что я не думаю, что какие-то дальнейшие планы по размещению такого оружия могли бы угрожать российской системе. Но в целом я не поддерживаю системы ПРО. И основной источник этого — это не угрожать России, это чтобы были рабочие места в США. Ведь это военно-промышленный комплекс, и сколько людей там работает.
Господин посол, я считаю ваши аргументы неубедительными, отношусь с огромным уважением к вашему опыту и к искусству, которым вы пользуетесь, дипломатическому искусству, которым вы пользуетесь безупречно, уклоняясь от прямого ответа. Вы все-таки на него дали прямой ответ, но элементы украшательства в вашем ответе были. Не нужно создавать рабочие места, которые результатом своей деятельности имеют угрозу для всего человечества. А потом создание новых систем противоракетной борьбы, это новые рабочие места. Зачем их создавать в такой сфере? Давайте их будем создавать в сфере биологии, в сфере фармацевтики, в сфере высоких технологий, не связанных с производством вооружений. Теперь, что касается, угрожает это России или не угрожает. Уверяю вас, американские специалисты в области безопасности и стратегических вооружений прекрасно отдают себе отчет в том, что это угрожает российскому ядерному потенциалу. И вся эта система создается для того, чтобы свести ядерные потенциалы других ядерных государств, кроме США, к нулю.
So, as you see, it's just a jobs program. Now, I feel a little awkward here because Jack Matlock was an excellent ambassador to the last days of the Soviet Union, to the first days of Russia, the new Russia, and he's extremely, extremely bright. I don't know what possessed him to say the real truth there in talking about a jobs program, but you can see that Putin jumped all over the possibility to indicate that they may think, that is, the United States may think that it's a jobs program. The Russians have to take it more seriously. Now, what Putin and what the Russians and others, the Chinese and the North Koreans and the South Koreans and everybody else should take seriously is how dangerous this is, how destabilizing it is, okay? And the Russians can't pretend anymore that this ABM system, or this missile defense system, is against Iran because Iran's hands are tied for another decade. So I'd like you to pay very, very good attention to this next clip, which just is about a minute long. And it shows Putin very uncharacteristically losing his cool. He's talking to Western journalists. They don't get it, okay? They have no idea how the Russians look at this as a threat to their national security, as a threat to their retaliatory capability if these missile defense systems are able to squelch their offensive capability with their ICBM. So watch this next thing, and you'll see from this segment, which I hope will go on just a few seconds now, how Putin really is kind of beside himself, because as you can see, some of these Western journalists say, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So let's have that second clip, please.
Угрозы нет, а система ПРО продолжает строиться. Значит, мы были правы, когда говорили, что нас обманывают. С нами неискренне, ссылаясь на якобы имеющуюся иранскую ядерную угрозу при строительстве системы ПРО. Ну так оно и есть на самом деле. В очередной раз пытались нас надуть. Сейчас построили эту систему, сейчас ставят там ракеты. Так? Но вам должно быть известно, что ракеты эти закладываются в капсулу, которая используется для пусков ракет средней дальности «Томагавк» морского базирования. Туда закладывают сейчас антиракеты, способные поражать цели на расстоянии 500 километров. Но мы знаем, технологии развиваются. Мы примерно знаем, в каком году примерно американцы получат новую ракету, которая будет уже не 500 километров, а 1000, а потом больше. И с этого момента они начнут угрожать нашему ядерному потенциалу. Мы по годам знаем, что будет происходить. И они знают, что мы знаем. Это вам только вешают лапшу на уши, как у нас говорят, а вы, в свою очередь, вешаете своему населению. И люди не чувствуют опасности. Вот меня что беспокоит. Ну как мы не можем понять? Мы тащим мир вообще в совершенно новое измерение. Вот в чем проблема. Делают вид, что как будто ничего не происходит. Но я не знаю даже, как достучаться.
So there you have it. What's the matter with you folks? Why can't you understand this? And he's talking to the journalists, of course, and you can't see any rational discussion of this in Western media. The Russians are very upset about this, and by extension, you could see that applying to the Far East itself. So with respect to the new president that we have, President Trump, I would have to say that he has huge openings here. Obama promised after he was reelected he'd deal. Now it's Trump's turn, and this will be topic A on Russia's agenda. There's no reason why we can't get around the table as we did in '72 and subsequently and deal on this very key